To protect my privacy, I had kept my name anonymous. I'm not sure how to begin my story, actually, but I'll do the best I can. I guess I'll start by informing you about the show called Blue's Clues. For those of you who have never watched it, Blue's Clues is a show for young children that has created in 1996 and lasted for 10 years with a total of 6 seasons and 142 episodes. The shows involve Steve and Joe looking for clues and solving mysteries with the help of the audience. Blue was the animated dog that would label the clues with her paw prints out. Blue's Clues was a hit with many little kids, including myself. The idea was original and the artwork was amazing. However, Steve Burns was the backbone of the show, and Steve Burns is the actor who played Steve. He was more serious than Barney the dinosaur, but he loved kids and he knew exactly how to make them happy. There was just something magical about his enthusiasm that made me want to watch more and more of his episodes. However, the saddest part of my childhood is when Steve left the show in 2002 and pursued a musical career. Steve was replaced by Donovan Patton, who was the actor for Joe, but it wasn't the same. I stopped watching Blue's Clues after Steve left. It's just lost its magic for me. Joe was nothing like Steve. He was a total goofball, and my mother told me that Donovan Patton was acting a bit too hard. When I turned 16, my family moved into a large 3-story house in New York that was previously owned by a nice old lady. A few weeks after moving in, I decided to do some exploring in the attic. I found an old trunk. To my surprise, it was filled with a bunch of old VHS tapes. All of them were Blue's Clues tapes. I knew the old lady's cell phone number, so I decided to call her and ask her about the tapes. She told me that she brought them from a collector a few years back for her little grandson to watch. After I thanked her and hung up, I emptied the trunk and checked the tapes. All of them had episodes that I already watched, except for one. The one tape I had just found a regular sticker, not a factory sticker like the other tapes had. The title of the sticker was Blue's Clues, Sorrow. I thought the title was a little strange, but I figured it was just a copy of Steve Goes to College episode. It was a one where Steve goes off to college and Joe takes his place because Steve said goodbye to all of his friends in the episode. I consider it to be very sorrowful indeed. When my parents went on their anniversary trip and left me in charge of the house for one night, I figured it was a perfect opportunity to check out the tape. Our TV has a VCR, and I have to admit, I feel a tingle of excitement when I place the tape in the player. I was about to relive my childhood memories of watching Blue's Clues. I didn't care I was too old to watch it. I knew for sure that I would enjoy it. At least, that's what I thought. The episode started off completely normal. The Blue's Clues book opened up and Steve looked out of a window of his little yellow house. Hi out there, it's me, Steve. Have you seen Blue? Wait, she's not here? Well, come on in. The front door opened and Steve was in the living room looking concerned. I need to tell you something important. Blue was at the pet hospital and she was having an operation on her heart. I hope she's okay. Steve stopped talking to look down at the floor and the scene ended. The next scene shows Steve at the pet hospital. He sat in a waiting room without making a sound. He did nothing else but stare at the doors that led into the operating room. A surgeon opened the door, but she wasn't an animated character. She was a real person. Most more concerns that most characters that's on Blue's Clues were animated, and except Steve and Joe, they were real persons. But she whispers in Steve's ear, but I can hear everything that she said.
Her heart stopped beating. We tried our best, but we couldn't get it to beat again. I'm sorry.
The scene ended. The next scene started with a title card saying that a month had passed after Blue's funeral. A deep voice spoke.
There were 5 stages in the grieving process: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and exceptions.
The voice said. Steve was experiencing 3 stages all at once: depression, anger, and a mental illness. Steve was in his bedroom, lying in his bed. He began to cry, and the color of the episode turned black and white like a depressing old photograph. He cried so hard that his breathing grew shallow. Then the scene ended. The next scene showed us Steve sitting up on his bed. He stopped crying, but his face was now red and his teeth were clenched tightly. In his hands was a stuffed antler, Horus. He was holding it so tight. I can tell he was squeezing it or something. Then he shouted, "Blue! Blue!" at the top of his lungs. His screams sent chills down my spine. Steve ripped off a Horus' head, and a black ooze squirted out of the stuffed animal's neck. Steve threw Horus in a fit of rage. When the antler landed, the oozes completely covered the floor. I fought the urge to vomit. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep watching. Steve's body began to turn darker and darker color by the second, and after about 5 seconds, Steve has turned completely black. He got up out of his bed, walk out of his bedroom, and then walk into a living room. I thought he was going to sit in his big red thinking chair, but he didn't. He stood in front of the chair, and he stared at the screen for a full minute. His eyes... He had lost his fucking pupils and become nothing more than white voided dots. He started crying again, then the white tears streamed down his face, and some sad piano music began to play. The music was so heartbreaking, I shed a few tears on myself. A message flashed across the screen. You can figure out Blue's clues, but you can't figure out the insanity. The scene ended. The next scene shows Steve still standing in his living room. He was no longer crying, and his body has been turned into a regular normal color. I can't live without Blue, he said. She was my best friend. She gave my life happiness and meaning. Without her, I'm nothing to live for. I'm nothing! The kids in the background that helped Steve find the clues started to cry and whimper, and they shouted, "Please don't do it, Steve. We love you. We're your friends too." "I'm sorry," Steve said. "I'm sorry if I break your hearts for doing this, but I have no choice. Goodbye." He held up a container. The camera zoomed in on the label, which says, "The Podism Sendai." Steve had a calm look on his face, and as he swallowed the contents of a container, he instantly collapsed. He foamed at the mouth, and his body twitched and thrashed on the floor like he was being electrocuted. And then he eventually stopped moving. I knew that he was deceased. The episode finally ended as the TV cut to static. I sat still, dazed. It took my brain a few minutes to comprehend what I had just watched. I made a decision then and there to play detective to find out where in the world does this episode come from. I looked up the name of the episode online but came up with nothing. I knew the company Viacom owned Blue's Clues, because their company name was shown on the factory sticker of the other VHS tapes. After a bit of research, I wrote a letter to the VCOM headquarters. I told them about my experience, and I asked them where they knew the tape was coming from. 2 weeks later, I got a reply in the mail.
Dear Mr. Thank you for taking the time to write to us. We are quite surprised by your story about the unaired episode of Blue's Clues that you discovered. We are grateful that you contacted us concerning it. We can personally assure you that Viacom Media Networks, as well as Viacom, claims no ownership or liability whatsoever regarding the episode. However, we still feel that an explanation is in order. Unfortunately, we are unable to provide details of the tape's creation, as we simply don't know how this happened. Back in 2002, we received the VHS tape in the package with no return address. The words Mr. Ted were written on the package along with the tape, and there was a letter from Mr. Ted stating that he was the biggest fan of Blue's Clues series and asked for our approval to air his fan-made creation on television. We were quite flattered that a fan would send us a fan-made episode for airing. However, when our editors viewed the episode for refinement, they were quite appalled by its nature. A few of the staff who viewed the episode unbelievably went into shock and had to be transported to the emergency room immediately. Due to the horrifying content, we had absolutely no plans to air the episode. We passed the tape to a private collector, but we were dismayed to discover that he had many copies made. Now, we ask that you please do not release the contents of the tape or the letter to the public, as we do not want to upset the viewers who love and support our show for younger children. With warm regards, Michael D. Frickless.
Question bounce around inside my head, and they still do to this day. Who is Mr. Ted, and how in the world is he able to create this demonic episode? Was he even, human? Out of respect of Viacom, I'm afraid I cannot provide any footages. However, I figure releasing a single screenshot and a copy of a letter to the public wouldn't make them too angry about it. And yet you're probably wondering, why are you telling me this? What's the point of this story here? To be honest though, I just wanted to get off of my chest. I kept a secret for a little while, but I eventually felt the desire to tell someone, whether they believe it or not. A part of my brain told me to throw away the tape and the letter, but I have to keep both in my closet to remind me of what I had experienced was real. And now I realize that some so-called fans of TV shows are not normal as you might think they are.